Today, we're very happy to have Thay back again, bringing us always very heartwarming, empowering, inspiring talk. Thay. So, a brief introduction of Thay, although many of you already know who is Thay. So, Thay's ordained name is Thay Thong Phap. I can never pronounce it as well as Thay. It sounds the same properly to me. So, we address Thay as Thay, which is teacher. So Thay is from South Australia and is living currently at the small town called Gladstone in the Southern Fringe Ranges. And he has had a long and varied career in the human services. So Thay was fully ordained in September 2005 and has worked as a university chaplain and offered contemplative care in the area of palliative care. So since 2007, he is trained in clinical pastoral education and has worked until April 2021 as a supervisor and educator of chaplains in training. So Thay currently lives with his beloved dogs, Joey and Lucy. So welcome, Thay, and thank you so much for continuing to support the AEB community. Over to you, Thay.
Thank you, Meredith, and good evening to everyone. It's lovely to be back again. These 4 weeks seem to go quickly, really, but that's just fine by me. So shall we begin with a little bit of meditation? I understand, of course, that you can't get a bell to work on Zoom, so we'll just use words to get meditation going. And I'm presuming everybody has some experience or a lot of experience with meditation. So the guided meditation will just be fairly relaxed and not too wordy.
Okay.
So we're sitting in our seats or on a cushion or however, with our eyes closed or open, whichever is most comfortable for you. Sit with your backs not straight, but not like a ramrod, just straight but relaxed. And relax your shoulders as well. You can place one hand on top of the other in your lap, or you can place one hand on each thigh. Tuck your chin in so that your nose is in line with your abdomen. And as I said, relax your shoulders. And come to rest after what may have been a busy day. And take 3 gentle, deep breaths to bring yourself back to the present moment, following the breath inwards and outwards, breathing in, breathing out. 3 breaths. Place your attention on your breath in the place where you most readily experience it. So if you experience your breath in your nostrils, keep your attention there. If you experience your breath with the rising and the falling of your chest, keep your attention there. If you experience your breath with the expansion and contraction of your abdomen, keep your attention there. And if you're using the abdomen as a place of anchoring your breath, you could put your hands on your abdomen to feel the abdomen as it expands and contracts. Breathing in, breathing out, keeping your attention as best you can on that place where you are most aware of your breathing. Breathing in, breathing out. You notice that your mind wanders away from the breath. Just gently bring it back to the breathing. Bring it back to the breathing without any judgment of yourself. It's in the nature of the mind to wander, and your task is simply to bring your attention back to the breath. And you may have to do this many times during this period of meditation. Once you become aware of your attention having moved away, then that's the job you're supposed to be doing. That is to maintain your awareness of what is happening. Breathing in, breathing out, remaining aware of your breath in the place where you most readily experience it. Breathing in, breathing out, keeping your attention on the in-breath and the out-breath. Breathing in, breathing out, keeping your attention on your in-breath and your out-breath. When you are ready, please bring your attention back into the room where you are sitting. If you need to, you can stretch your body or massage your body. If there is any aching or any pain or any kind of physical sensation that you would like to relieve yourself of. When you're ready, open your eyes. So tonight I'm going to start a series of talks on Vietnamese Zen Buddhism, and particularly on the lineage that I'm part of. I want you to know that I have no intention at all of converting anyone to my lineage. You all have a teacher, and you and you all have a sangha, and that's a wonderful thing and a great treasure which we need to cherish. I'm just letting you know about the teacher that I love and cherish, and the lineage that I have committed myself to, and the teaching, just so that you might know me a little more, but also so that you might know something more about Vietnam. When I read about the Buddhism that's available to Westerners, Vietnamese Buddhism is often not mentioned. Where it is mentioned, it is usually the teaching and practice of the Plum Village tradition, founded by the Most Venerable Thich Nhat Han. This is a very popular tradition because of its ability to express itself in numerous languages other than Vietnamese, such as English. Thich Nhat Han himself had the capacity to express himself in Vietnamese, English, and French, and his teachings were expressed very simply and were relevant to both Vietnamese and non-Vietnamese practitioners. I encountered the teachings of Thich Nhat Han in the mid-90s, due in large part to my sense of solidarity with the Vietnamese people during and subsequent to the American war in Vietnam that eventually brought so many refugees to Australia. In 1998, with the help of Can Le Van, whom some of you may know, and who is a teacher in the Lotus Bud Sangha in Sydney, I introduced Thich Nhat Han's teachings to Adelaide in the form of 2 days of mindfulness and the foundation of the first Sangha in the Plum Village tradition, called Budhita Sangha. At the same time, I met with a Vietnamese man called Kim Tran, a pharmacist in Adelaide, who was the student of the other significant Vietnamese Zen master in Vietnam, the Most Venerable Thích Thanh Từ. who restored in Vietnam the Truc or bamboo forest school of Vietnamese Zen, or Tien. Both words Zen, which is Japanese, and Tien, which is Vietnamese, are derived from the Chinese word Chan, which is again derived from the Sanskrit word jhana and means meditation. The Truc school was founded in medieval Vietnam by the Tran dynasty and continued under the Lê dynasty. And just by the by, there's a big Chinese temple in Adelaide, in Ottawa, called Zhu Lin. And Zhu Lin means bamboo forest. So Zhu is Truc and Lin is Lam. So they have the same name, bamboo forest. Eventually, under the influence of the Chinese Pure Land tradition, the Truc school in Vietnam died away. But in the middle of the 20th century, it was revived by my teacher, Most Venerable Thích Thanh Từ. And so you know who I'm talking about. I'm just going to try and hold up a photograph of my teacher there. I don't know if you can make out a face, but he's my teacher, my precious teacher. And his name is the Most Venerable, or Hoa Thương Thích Thanh Từ. He revivified the Truc school in the middle of the 20th century. He was originally a practitioner of Pure Land, but he made the decision that he wanted to practice meditation, and he really brought back to life the tradition of what we call Tien in Vietnamese, or Zen, and with its roots in India and China and in Vietnam. So when we bow to our spiritual ancestors, we bow to 3 Buddhas, we bow to Bodhidharma. Oh no, we bow to the 3 Buddhas, including Shakyamuni Buddha, and then we bow to Mahakashyapa, and then Ananda, and then we bow to 2 Chinese masters, and then 3 Vietnamese masters, and all the masters, all the Zen patriarchs of India, China, and Vietnam. So his task, he found his task in life was to revivify the tradition that came from India originally, through China to Vietnam, and in particularly through the Tran dynasty and the Lê dynasty in medieval Vietnam. While it is close in many ways, my tradition is close in many ways to the Plum Village school, and while my teacher and Thich Nhat Han were friends, the 2 schools went in slightly different directions. Thích Thanh Từ remained in Vietnam after the war ended and continued to develop a specifically Vietnamese-based tradition. Thich Nhat Han was exiled in France, from where he developed his teaching and practice, more with Westerners and Vietnamese refugees in view. During the years of building Budhita Sangha in Thich Nhat Han's tradition in Adelaide, I also attended Kim Tran's meditation center, Upeksha Village. Upeksha is simply the Sanskrit word for Upeka. So his village, his center was called Upeksha Village, and it was in the Truc school. And I went along because I wanted to experience a more authentic Vietnamese religious practice than I could provide for myself, and because I wanted to get to know more Vietnamese people. Eventually, Kim Tran became a monk, and his name is Thich Tom Thieu, and I went to Plum Village just after he became a monk to experience a summer retreat. I stayed in Plum Village for 5 weeks, wondering if I might fulfill my yearning to become a monk in France. But to my great surprise, I discovered I didn't have an affinity for the Plum Village tradition or the Plum Village system, and neither did I want to live in Europe. I came home to Adelaide not a little confused. I went to visit Thay Thong Phap to tell him what had happened and to seek some support for what might happen next. He invited me to travel to Vietnam with him and to meet his teacher. I agreed. So in May of 2001, I flew to Vietnam with him and we travelled down from Hanoi to Hue, thence to Ho Chi Minh City and back up to Adelaide, where Thích Thanh Từ lived in Truc Zen Monastery. In my first 2 days in the monastery, I wasn't allowed to actually live in the monastery. I had to go home. I could come at 6 in the morning and then go home at night at 9 o'clock. And then I had to live in a hotel or stay in a hotel. That was the rules then that the government imposed, but I think it's changed slightly now. In my first 2 days, I had a good opportunity to stay among the monks and get to know them a little. This was a lot harder at Plum Village because the poor monks there had thousands of people to deal with all the time. And so getting close to them was a lot harder. But I was the only visitor staying in the monastery. And so I had a lot of access to the monks, which was really a blessing. I also had 3 opportunities to meet with Zen Master Thích Thanh Từ. It was in the context of these meetings with Thích Thanh Từ that I became aware of some significant understandings about Zen and my relationship to it, as well as discovering in Thích Thanh Từ my teacher. And I need to say that I started getting interested in Buddhism in 1978, and I could never really take to Zen at all. It seemed to be too clever by far, all these kind of haikus and koans and a whole lot of Japanese culture that I wasn't familiar with, and I just didn't like it at all. But when I came to it in Vietnamese, in the Vietnamese tradition, it was very different, and I grew to feel a lot more affinity for it. The other thing is that my teacher doesn't speak or didn't speak English. He can't talk anymore. He's now 100 years old, and he had a stroke several years ago, and now he can't talk. But he could never speak English, and I didn't speak Vietnamese. So we managed in our conversations, we managed well with a good interpreter. It seems to me that we can never be certain of where our affinities lie until after we have discovered them. The mysteries associated with karma and affinity, or in Vietnamese, Yuan, have never stopped intriguing me. Some 4 years after encountering my teacher, when I was undergoing bhikkhu training in the Truc Monastery of Great Light in Bonsall in California, one morning at 6 o'clock after the 2-hour meditation sit in the meditation hall and chanting the Heart Sutra, I wondered to myself, how did a boy from Port Adelaide get to be a Buddhist monk in a monastery in Southern California, chanting by heart an ancient Indian text in the Vietnamese language? I mean, who could have imagined that possible? I couldn't have imagined that as a child. But there you are. That's where our karma takes us. So in order to introduce you to the Truc or Bamboo Forest School of Vietnamese Zen, I'm actually going to read to you from my journal entries that were made in June 2001, 22 years ago, on my first trip to Vietnam with Thay Thong Phap. I could have said much more about the history of the Truc or Bamboo Forest School, and I could have told you about the teachings of my Zen master, Thích Thanh Từ. But I want, over the coming months, to share with you the more authentic approach of telling out my own experience of entering the tradition and allowing myself in my own slow way to grow into a tradition that is a long way culturally, linguistically, and philosophically from my Anglo-Celtic South Australian background. And so we begin on the 8th of June in 2001. If you'll excuse me, I'll refer to my journal. The 8th of June, 2001. This morning has been lovely. I am over the cold and fever I've had these last couple of days, and I am grateful to be seeing the world through clear eyes again and feeling content. Everything changes, even suffering. I'm getting to know the road here from the hotel to the monastery and back again. but I only really know the back of the driver's head. After 5 days, the walk from the parking lot into the monastery enclosure at 6:30 is cool, peaceful, beautiful, and tranquil. My breakfast arrives about the same time as I bundle my bag on the floor. After breakfast, I clean my teeth, and about a dozen handsome Vietnamese monks gather around to interview me, asking every conceivable question. This morning, I said I felt a bit like a radio, it felt like a bit like a radio interview, which caused some laughter. These men are so natural and open and happy. I don't doubt that's just my perception, but the great suffering inflicted by 3 2-hour meditation sits seems to be paying off. They have asked me to talk about what my views of the monastery life are. I can see that this is what appealed to me at the age of 17 or 18. All these loving men living simply together, gradually unraveling life's big questions. Then it was off to be in the fields, to hoe, which I did for a while, and came back to shower with Vietnam under my fingernails. Now I am sitting at a table with a monk practicing his Han characters in this beautiful, shady, tropical paradise, until I try and sit for another 2 hours, or get a cold and start worrying that I might die, or struggle with how to approach Thích Thanh Từ with my questions about being a monk. This AM, I woke up in my hotel room, looked out the window, and felt like a foreigner from far from home. What if I had been 19, forced into the army, and then sent here to kill people for 2 years? Robert Gordon Menzies seems to me to have a lot to answer for. And then I went to meet my teacher. Well, he wasn't my teacher at that stage, but he very quickly became my teacher. And he received me very graciously into his little home. And he asked me what I'd come for. And I'd come basically to ask him about being a monk. But I said that I have a house and a mortgage in Australia, and I don't know what to do about that in terms of becoming a monk. And he said to me, well, you don't need to worry about that. Those are just practical things. But I want to know from you, what do you think about Zen practice? Why do you think you practice? And I was just completely shaken by that question. I had no expectation of that question at all. I thought this would be a fairly straightforward, practical conversation, but it wasn't. My answer was to die fearlessly and joyfully. When I took the refuges and the precepts with Thich Nhat Han, we had to write out our aspirations when we took the precepts. And I wrote out that I wanted to die fearlessly and joyfully. And that's all I could think of. So that's what I said to his question. That's how I answered his question. The Zen master's response was this: that's only superficial. Every question I ask you, I want you to answer me. And then he gave me a teaching. Body and mind are transient, false. You can't depend on them. What you can depend on is the true mind. We cause problems and conflicts by grabbing things for the false body and the false mind. Apart from the false body and mind, what else do you think we have? I was stunned by the question again. When thoughts do not arise, then are you still aware or not aware, he asked. I gave no real answer except for some remark about sitting by a lake. When everything in the mind is continuously changing and not permanent, we call that birth and death. The mind is also change. When the mind is not grasping objects or mind consciousness, for example, thoughts arising, that is pure awareness that never changes. That is, there is no birth and no death. And when I was rereading this today, I thought that's exactly what Ajahn Buddhidasa Bhikkhu teaches. He doesn't teach about rebirth and those kinds of things. What he says is that with the arising of and passing away of every thought, that's birth, death, and rebirth. And that's what my teacher was saying as well. And the very interesting thing is that Ajahn Buddhidasa Bhikkhu was also very, very interested in Zen, and he translated Huang Po's teachings into Thai, and he was the abbot of his monastery in Thailand. So when the mind is not grasping objects of mind consciousness, for example, thoughts arising, that is pure awareness that never changes. There is no birth and no death. Pure awareness is the true mind. The teaching on the and then he gave me a teaching from the Surangama Sutra, which is a Mahayana Sutra that I've never read and had no idea about. He says that the teaching on the Surangama Sutra is teaches us why we are crazy. A man looks at his face in the mirror. He sees his lovely face. When he turns the mirror down, he goes crazy, thinking he has lost his head. His craziness is our craziness. He forgets his true head for the sake of the shadow in the mirror. And I'd never heard that story before, but it made a lot of sense to me at the time. The purpose of practice, he says, is to realize our true face, of our eternal true face. Practice leads to recognizing wrong thoughts, the grasping mind. When the mind is settled, the true mind becomes evident. It was there all the time. The grasping false mind obscures the true mind, like clouds covering the moon. Because of this, we live in craziness. Samadhi is when, in sitting meditation, the mind is not grasping thoughts, is not following feelings. That's samadhi. And from samadhi, true wisdom is evident. That is, the true eternal face is already there. And another word, in at least that's used in my tradition for the true face, is Buddha nature. So that was the end of that interview, and I had to come back the next day to have a second interview with him, and I considered what my interview question might be. And the question I took back with me to him was, "Thank you for showing me the shallow nature of my understanding. What must I do to allow Zen to take root in my life?" So then I went on to say, on the 9th of June 2001, it has been a powerful 24 hours. My interview with Zen Master Thích Thanh Từ has affected me greatly for the better. In the most loving way, he showed me how shallow my grasp of Zen is, based on reading and theory alone. It has yet to really take root in my life. And this is another thing I want to say about, this is one of the things that convinced me that this monk was my teacher, and that is that he asked me these questions and he answered my questions. He pointed out my lack of understanding, but he didn't do it from the point of view of saying, "Oh, well, this is a stupid white man, what would he know?" I could tell that he was telling me something incredibly deep and wise, and he was doing it very compassionately. And I knew that there was real love operating there from this Zen master, and he wasn't being critical of a European or anything like that. And I think it was in that moment when I realized that I thought, this is the teacher I've been looking for, who can actually recognize my need and not criticize me for it, but respond lovingly to it. So in that moment, he became my teacher. At first, his response to me felt shocking. And there were moments when I wanted to run out of the room and catch the first plane back to Adelaide, but there was no plane leaving for Adelaide from the monastery. So I had to stay and face up to what I'd gone seeking for. When Thay Thong Phap and I walked back to my room, he kept saying to me, "But I explained all that to you." However, it had not taken root sufficiently for me to speak of it clearly from my own experience. One thing Thích Thanh Từ said that I really appreciated was that my reason for practice, to die joyfully, and the idea that had worked, to die joyfully, was an idea that had worked for me for a while, but it was asking too little of the practice. Why have so little when there was so much more? I realized also that his method of asking me questions about my understanding caused me trouble. I'm so deeply conditioned by the education system to think that a question is looking for a correct answer that I found the experience rather harrowing. I realized, however, that the personal purpose of the questions was to discover my level of understanding, or even to expose it for me to see. There was no judgment implied. I knew that. I felt the great compassion that Thích Thanh Từ is renowned for. What was so disturbing was that if I hadn't really been practicing Zen all this time, what had I been doing? Perhaps not much that is serious. And so that was my interview that brought so much, the two interviews that brought so much insight to me, and also the knowledge that this monk is my teacher. I don't need to go any further, in spite of the fact that I don't speak Vietnamese and he doesn't speak English. What are we going to do about that? And that's another aspect of affinity. When you meet your teacher, you can't guarantee that the conditions will be absolutely what you think they ought to be. You get a teacher who speaks no English and you speak no Vietnamese. So what are you going to do about all of that? And I've been very fortunate to have found answers to that problem. So where do I go from here? Here's some more thoughts from my journal. Often during this week of staying with the monks, I think to myself, I'm in Vietnam. Couldn't quite believe that I was in Vietnam. But that is not so odd to me, because the connection I had with Vietnam was already deep for me, or the things that shocked me about life. And some of these are the things that shocked me about life in developing countries. I'd only ever been in 1978 to Indonesia and seen so much poverty for many ordinary folk. And at that time, when the president was President Suharto, people were very much under the thumb and weren't allowed to have their own points of view. And so I'd seen that. And I'd also lived in Zimbabwe and taught in Zimbabwe, another developing country, and had seen not so much a great deal of suffering, but a great deal of, what can I say, amongst people, a great yearning for freedom and a great yearning for life. And that made me change my mind about how people in developing countries are always in terrible situations. Yes, they might be in a terrible situation, I thought, but they're also living rich and full lives. And I can't assume that they're not, just because they might be poor or they might be under the thumb of a repressive regime. Occasionally I've wondered what it must have been before occasionally I wondered when I was in Vietnam, what it must have been like having helicopters and bombers fly over with the air on fire, the people being killed in the paddy fields, all the horror of war. It is actually unimaginable. And it's unimaginable to me because I've never experienced it, but it was also unimaginable then because Vietnam was basically at peace and people were working very hard to recreate their country. So to try to remember or imagine what this beautiful place was like during this terrible war was very difficult. But I knew it had happened. And that's another aspect of my going to Vietnam, was that, one of the first adult decisions I made as a young person was to sign up as a conscientious objector I refused to go to Vietnam to kill young people and old people and to be killed myself. I didn't want to lose my life. I understood my life was precious and I wanted to preserve it, and I didn't want to harm others. So there's always been for me this great, I don't know if attachment's the right word, but we'll use that word, to Vietnam. And that's a big part of what made this journey for me really important. So my time with Thích Thanh Từ in that afternoon was very lovely. He was full of love. He gave me simple instruction to practice Zen and to deepen the roots of it in my own life. The implications of this lovely visit will, I am sure, continue to unfold, and they have. Thay Thong Phap has been greatly supportive and has worked hard to make this holiday a great success. And so I always feel very grateful, not just to my teacher, but to the monk who took me to Vietnam and introduced me to his teacher. So that's just the story of my introduction to Vietnamese Zen. And I wanted you to know that rather than try and tell you all kinds of abstract things, I wanted to tell you why it was so important to me and what change it brought in my life. So I'm going to finish this sharing by reading a poem to you that I wrote whilst in the training monastery 3 and a bit years after I met my teacher in Vietnam. The invitation here, thank you. The invitation here, now I've lost my notes. Can't see what I was going to say. The invitation here is simply for you over this coming month to, before I speak to you again, to read this poem and to try and understand or come up with your own understanding of what these images mean to me in terms of what my teacher taught me. And it's called Staying in the Bamboo Forest. And I wrote it one day in the monastery when I was struggling to stay mindful of my breath. And while I was struggling very hard not to be irritated by some other monk, probably. You might find that a bit odd that monks and nuns get irritated by one another, but I want to keep emphasizing that monks and nuns are people too. And just as you and others might get irritated by other people in your life, so we irritate one another as well, particularly as we live together, or in monasteries, we live together all the time and eat together and work together and meditate together and sometimes sleep in the same room. So we're also human and we're bound to get irritated. And this poem came out of the struggle I had one night, sitting for 2 hours in meditation and living with, I think it was one particular monk at the time. Staying in the bamboo forest, a cool silver moon hangs in a velvet black sky. She shows the way to myriad creatures of the night. Storm clouds gather. Her face is shrouded. The light is no more. I sit and watch the parting of the clouds. So if you're willing to look at that over the month, you might come up with some idea of what I'm experiencing and what I'm getting at. Thank you. And if there's anything you want to share, or
so this is homework for next talk. I will,
and if you don't do the homework, you'll be in a lot of trouble.
I will put that in our website as well, newsletter and the Facebook, so you can keep referring.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, we open the floor. Does anyone would like to, have anything to discuss or any comments or something to share? Feel free to unmute yourself.
And
I'll just start the share.
It might be really lovely to hear your story of how you came to engage with your teacher. We all have different stories, and hearing the story of how we engage with our teacher might be very encouraging to one another. And after all, that's one of the purposes of a Sangha, is to encourage one another in the practice.
But it's just so fortunate as well, like, you know, that you can really meet the teacher, your real teacher of your life, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah,
As you say that you make me think as well, it's like the condition may not be as what we expected, as you say that it may not be how we picture it to be.
That's
But
right.
you know, how do you actually really determine or find out at that moment, okay, this is going to be my teacher for sure, you know?
I think for me, it's entirely about intuition. It's not logical. I don't sit down and I don't write down prakantipalo, ayakema, Thich Nhat Han, Thích Thanh Từ, and write all the fors and againsts and make a decision like that. It's not like that at all. It comes from many years of searching and discovering that for whatever reason, the affinity that I need to have for that person isn't there. And then suddenly you meet someone, or I met someone, and I just knew within myself, it was entirely intuitive. And in this instance, it came about because I knew this monk was incredibly wise and incredibly loving. And that's what I needed. I can't take just the wisdom without the love. I have to know that I'm cared about. And he did. He does care about us, even though he may not see us anymore. For me, it was just intuition. I operate a lot on the basis of intuition. And I put that down to my Irish heritage. That I happen to be that kind of person.
And you can feel that connection as well, right? At that moment.
Yes, it's just a feeling that suddenly occurs, and you think, how do I get to be? How does this Sa'om, I don't know what the Chinese word for Sa'om is, grandfather monk. How does this grandfather monk, who I can't talk to on a normal basis, how do I get to be in his life and he in mine? I don't understand it, but I accept it. And I've never had any desire to find, there are plenty of teachers around who are English speaking, there are Western teachers, all of that, but I've never had any desire to give up on the Truc school, and I only ever talk about him as my teacher. I've had other wonderful teachers like Prakantipalo and Ayakema and Thich Nhat Han, but Thích Thanh Từ is the person I know to be my root teacher, really. Yeah, an old Vietnamese monk and a middle-aged Anglo-Australian. How that happens, I don't know. All I know it does happen. What about your teachers? How does Bhante Tejadamo get to be your teacher, or whomever is your teacher get to be your teacher? What drew you to your teacher?
Just to share with you, I think this thing about intuition is so true, because when I met my teacher, I was probably about 12 or 13 years old. And I had followed my uncle to the temple because he wanted to meet this teacher. And I wasn't interested in Buddhism or anything at that time at all. So when we went to see the teacher, I said, you go in and see the teacher, I'll sit in the car and wait. So I sat in the car, and this was like maybe noon, 1 o'clock or something. And then after a while, this man came out, this monk came out. And then he said to me, it's very hot sitting in the car waiting for us to talk. Just come inside, just come in and sit for a while. It'll be cooler inside in the temple then. So I said, oh, okay. So I got out and then I went in and I sat down and I listened to him talk to my uncle. And then after a while, when they had finished their conversation, he just turned to me and he said, every Sunday we have this Bodhi Puja ceremony in our temple, 7:30 every Sunday. Why don't you come? Try and come. And that was it, that's all he said to me. He said, well, just try and come. And I was like racking my brains, how am I going to come? Because I didn't have transport, which means I'd have to go back, tell my father, and see whether he could bring me, every Sunday. But I said yes, which was such a shock because I don't know why I even said yes. I said, okay, I'll try, and that's how I met my teacher. And then from there on, I went back. I told my dad, who was also not spiritually, I said, there's this monk who said that there's this thing on every Sunday, 7:30, maybe we can go. And then my father said, well, okay, why don't we try and go one day and let's see how it is. And then from that time on, my father, my mom, and me, we went to the temple every Sunday for the Bodhi Puja. And then, from there it was, it was just so easy then to connect with him, you see. And it's so strange because I really had nothing in common. I didn't know anything about Buddhism or whatever it was, but just by him saying, come every Sunday, 7:30. That was it. Hooked. Yeah. And then later on, after I graduated, he moved away, and then we were in different parts. And then all of a sudden, he came back, and he moved to a temple right opposite where I lived. And so because of that, every day after school, I could go to the temple and make him his cup of tea in the afternoon. That became my job, so to speak. I'd go in the afternoon and make him a cup of tea. And then after that, he started to teach me the sutras. And because he was like the only monk there, he taught a group of us to recite all the sutras in Pali so that we could help him when he was doing some chantings and service and, things like that. So the connection just, kept going stronger and stronger. And so now he was living in a temple which was opposite my house. So I didn't even need my father to take me anymore to the temple because I could just walk across to see him. So every afternoon I would make him his tea and coffee. And that's how it started. Then after that, after I graduated, we left and we lost touch. He went back to Sri Lanka and all that. And then I was going to get married. So we decided to get married back in my hometown and say, we'll go back. And no idea where he was. So we went back to get married. And then I went to the temple because we wanted to have a ceremony at the temple. And guess who was visiting from Sri Lanka at that time? He was there. So he said, okay, I will do your ceremony for you for the wedding. It's just unbelievable, the connection. So, yeah, that's how it all happened with my teacher.
The karma.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable.
Thank you, Sujata, for sharing that. And what you've said and what Thay has presented might also raise the question of past lives. And we wonder, isn't it, as Buddhists, whether this life or next life, there are parts of it that we continue from the previous life.
Yeah.
So when we click with somebody today, like Thay just clicked with your teacher, across cultures, across race, across nation.
Yeah.
We wonder, isn't it, whether in your past lives you were together in some way, and this life you continue the togetherness.
Yeah.
And it could be the same way for Sujata and for many others.
My teacher actually told me sometime a few years later that, there was a group of us, including Leanne and all that, we were all in the same group. as with the same teacher. But my teacher actually told me that I and another young boy at that time, he said, the two of you were my disciples from the past.
Yeah, the Tibetans.
That's what he said to us. Yeah.
The Tibetans had a lot of their disciples. Something about their past life that connects them now with this Tibetan teacher and so on. But I was going to ask Thay if Thay would care to reflect and answer perhaps something more personal. I think there's a difference when somebody finds a teacher and becomes the monk or the nun and follow the spiritual tradition. I think there's something deeper going on there than we lay people finding a teacher, but not necessarily join that Sangha. Yeah. So I was going to ask Thay, and Thay can answer and not answer in whatever way you wish. So there are two things there, isn't it? In the first place, what drove you to Buddhism? What led you to Buddhism, or what attracted you to Buddhism? Quite apart from, obviously, you clicked with this teacher and this teacher clicked with you. And the clicking there obviously was, you felt cared for. That this man cared for you. So from a psychological understanding point of view, and you are a counselor and you are a chaplain, so you understand psychology as well. There could be that parental need, or that being fathered or being cared for that way, that connected. But before that, what led you to Buddhism? What drove you to follow the Dhamma this way?
That's a really good question. I actually grew up in the church. I went to church from when I was 3. I was put in on the cradle roll at my Sunday school. And from the age of 5, I wanted to be a minister in the church. And I was the only one in my whole extended family who had that kind of inclination. I knew my grandmother had a sister who had a cousin who was a nun, but I was the only one in my generation and in my whole extended family who had any kind of really strong religious inclination. I was really pleased when my niece was born and she had the same inclination. And I think I inherited it from my father's mother, who was also a very devout woman. So I think I was just, I don't know how that happens either. I just know that it does. So I inherited or caught faith from my grandmother, and my niece had it as well. But we're the only ones that I know of in my family that are like that. And so I wanted to be a minister, but when I was 16, and this is what the last series of Dhamma talks I gave was about, were the things that drew me to the monastic life, because I grew up in a church that didn't have monks or nuns in it. And so when I felt at the age of 16 that I was really called to the monastic life, I had to leave the church I was in, and I became an Anglican, because I knew within the Anglican church there were monastics. And so I applied to become a monk. And I really, and I was accepted by a religious community. But the condition they put on that was that I matriculate, that I get through year 12, and so that I would have something to fall back on if I decided to leave monastic life. And I failed matriculation by one subject. I got one subject. I think I probably got 0 for the entire subject, because it was for all kinds of reasons. And I didn't get accepted. And I got it, but I did get accepted as a what do they call them? A matric, like a what's the word for it? Well, I was accepted into a teacher's college and I could go to teacher's college, and if I passed the first year, then I was considered a matriculant. But I didn't want to be a teacher. I just wanted to be a monk. That's all I'd really wanted. I could never figure out any kind of profession that I wanted to be part of. You know, I mean, teaching was important in my family for various reasons. And then my dad thought about maybe he could become a lawyer. And I couldn't think of anything more boring than studying law or medicine or those things. I just wanted to be a monk, and I could never really explain why. I just said, that's just what I'm called to. But when I wasn't allowed to go to the monastery, I got really disappointed and hurt, and I lost my Christian faith, my childhood faith, over a period of time. I don't regret going to Teachers College, because I learned a great deal and I came to understand a lot about human development from Teachers College, and I encountered a lot of new ideas that I'd never encountered before, and some of those ideas turned my mind completely. And in the end, I lost my childhood faith, which really upset me. I was rather distressed by losing that connection with the church, and at the time with Jesus, because Jesus was very important to me. But in that year, I came across a Chinese proverb which said, "If I keep a green bough in my heart, the singing bird will come." Now, I had no idea what it meant really, but I did know it was meant for me. It was specifically meant for me at the time, but I didn't know what it meant. And so I sat with it, like in Japanese, they're called koan, in Vietnamese, kung an. I just sat with that in my heart for many, many years, and slowly realized over time that that was really pointing to the intention or to the desire to be a monk. But I just have to wait until such an opportunity came. And then while I was at Teachers College, I also did a course in Southeast Asian history, and we had to write an essay on Buddhism. And so I got all the stuff out that I needed to read, and discovered that I found this a very interesting proposition, Buddhism, that it was intellectually very satisfying, and that I found real meaning in it. So I didn't immediately start searching Buddhism, and I never ever disliked Jesus or anything like that. But it stuck with me, this this experience of learning about Buddhism, and the Chinese proverb stayed with me. And I started to read a couple of books on Buddhism, and I did a course in Buddhism at Teachers College in the religion studies section. I went to Indonesia and visited the Borobudur in Central Java, which is a big Mahayana series of stupas, and I found that very beautiful. And then the next year, I had a friend who was doing an arts degree, and she needed some help with her work. So she asked me if I'd write an essay for her and submit the essay. So I wrote the essay on the Borobudur. And it was when I was writing that essay that I came to understand a lot more about Buddhist psychology. And I remember getting an A++ or an A++ for the essay. So I said, "You can have the A++, but I'll have the essay." And so that's what we did. So slowly I just got more and more interested. I joined a small Dharma group. Some friends of mine said, "You might be interested in this." So I went along to, it was a Tibetan group. And while I was never particularly drawn to Tibetan Buddhism, what I was drawn to was the Bodhisattva ideal. When I heard about them talking about the Bodhisattva as one who was prepared to lay down their life for the sake of others, it reminded me of Jesus. And the thought of Jesus had never gone away for me. And so for me, Jesus became a Bodhisattva. That's how I began to understand Jesus, not so much the savior of the world, but as a Bodhisattva. So I was always attracted to the Bodhisattva ideal. And then I met my first two teachers, who were Prakantipalo and Ayakema, and they were marvelous teachers, and I studied meditation with them at Wat Buddha Dhamma. But I still had unfinished business with the church. So I went back to the church, but I started to attend the Canberra Zen group at the same time as going to church. So I could never really give up on Buddhism, and I could never really say that, turn my back on Jesus at all. I felt that if I turned my back on Jesus, he'd be tapping me on the shoulder saying, don't forget me. And if I turned my back on the Buddha, he'd be tapping my shoulder and saying, don't forget me. So I was kind of stuck with these two Mahasattvas. But eventually I decided I would try living the life of a Benedictine monk in a Christian monastery. But that didn't work for me, and I came away from that. And eventually I came back to Buddhism. I went to see a nun in the Ramakrishna mission, and she came to Adelaide, and she offered interviews with her. So I made an time for an interview with her, but I couldn't think of the question I was going to ask until the morning I went for the interview. And I got in the shower, and it was when I was in the shower, having a shower, I knew what the question was. So I went to see her, and I said to her, I love Vedanta, I love Christianity, and I love Buddhism. Can I have all three? And she said, no, you have to choose one. You have to dig a well deep in one place. And as soon as she said that, I knew that my path was Buddhism. I just knew it. As soon as she said it, I thought, Buddhism, that's the place I have to dig the well. And eventually I got involved in Thich Nhat Han and then my own teacher. So that's how I came to Buddhism. It was a lot. I mean, the one thing I am pleased about is that it took me a long time. And no one can say that I rushed into anything. I didn't rush into anything. I took my time. But a lot of the time was just knowing. It was just knowing. I just had this knowing inside me. And when Mataji asked me the question, you've got to choose one, I just knew the one I had to choose, and I've never regretted it. But I say also that I'm a Buddhist monk who loves Jesus. So what's not to love about Jesus? How can you not love someone so good? But for me, the Buddha and the Buddha's way is my way. And as to my teacher, yes, I guess, I mean, my relationship with my own father was always a bit fraught. He had a difficult time with his father, and I had a difficult time with him. And I also was not the kind of man my father wanted me to be. He wanted me to, be interested in fighting and football and all the things that were of no interest to me at all. And he wasn't interested. He didn't want me involved in religion at all. But that I couldn't. That's all I could do. And so I used to think that God was the father I needed. God was the father that I wanted. But I think that when you meet a teacher, particularly, maybe of your own gender, whether you're a male or a female, there is a fatherliness about my teacher, and there was this real wisdom and this real caring, and there was a great deal of patience. I didn't jump straight into the monastic life. It took me 3 years to get back to Vietnam to ordain. But all the time, my teacher very patiently waited. And when I eventually went to the monastery in America, occasionally a monk would come and say, "Oh, we talked to our master this morning, and he wants to know how you're getting on." And so I thought that was really lovely, that he cared enough to ask after me. And so yes, and the other thing is that the word Thay in Vietnamese means teacher, like Shifu in Chinese. It's the same kind of word, but in in ancient Vietnam, the word Thay also meant father. So your father was your first teacher, according to that school of thought. And so when people ask me, what does Thay mean? I say, well, it's like a cross between rabbi or teacher and father. And that's how I feel about my teacher. He's a fatherly figure, but he's also a great teacher in my life. And I remember in the monastery, in the temple, when I was teaching the children when I was a monk, and I one day said to a lady in the monastery, in the temple, that sometimes I think it'd been lovely to have had children. And she said to me, but Thay, you have all these children. They're all yours. So I had this fatherly relation, and I was a school teacher and a university chaplain. So I had this fatherly relationship with a lot of people. And that was very satisfying, just as I have a sonly relationship with my teacher. And one last thing about that is that, and you mentioned Nkong, that about rebirth. Sometimes I regret that I can't speak Vietnamese, but at this late stage of my life, it's unlikely I'll learn enough Vietnamese to be able to talk about Buddhism. So I sat one day with my teacher's photograph, the one I showed you, and I worked out how, if you die in the next number of years, and I then die another 20 years onwards, and you're reborn and I'm reborn, by the time you're 30, if you become a monk, I will be how old? Maybe 15. And hopefully then we'll meet up and you can be my teacher again. So it was like a prayer to him to be around in the next life when I needed a teacher. So, you know, and I remember going into the Vietnamese temple the first time, and all the cooking smells seemed really familiar to me. And I love soaking dried mushrooms because the smell is very familiar to me. I love the smell of dried mushrooms. Oh, these things are just, I can't explain them. And I'm not going to insist that other people believe in rebirth. However, I don't know, if it's not rebirth, I don't know where I get them from. I have no idea. But there is strong, and I've been to Europe a couple of times, and I just don't feel any interest in Europe. But I'm looking forward eventually to going back to Vietnam, and I have friends in Singapore and Malaysia, and I want to travel up and visit them and on the way. And I don't know what it is, but I suspect it's what we call karma and rebirth, I think. You know.
Yeah, thank you, Thay. Thank you so much for sharing so much. Thank you.
Thank you. May I just a few words? I know we're running out of time, but I'm convinced that you do not pick Buddhism. Buddhism picks you. Karmic, whatever. Short story. 1966, coming to Australia. I was a member of the Communist Party back in Hungary, no religion at all. But the same year, my sister, who was living here, bought a villa home next to the New South Wales Buddhist Society, Rishoku Sheikai, Japanese lay organization, Malcolm Pierce, fantastic Englishman, wife Nara Pierce, a lovely Japanese girl, also a teacher. A month later, we had a small cake shop. The Thai monks hired the house next to the bakery. Prakantipalo Tampra Cruz Samai, who's the abbot in Campbelltown of the big monastery, walking right in front of the cake shop. I invited them, made coffee, tea, cakes. I couldn't even escape from the Dhamma, from the Buddhist teaching. And they became my teacher. And then when Aya came, Ilse Lederman was a young woman, long black hair, and she was a student of Prakantipalo also in the monastery. But Prakantipalo and Tamprakrusa. So that is life. And I'm very grateful and very, very happy. And I learned so much. But one thing bothers me only. I'm over 80 now, and I realize that the monk is not really your teacher. You learn, of course, a lot of things in the beginning, but you have to be your own teacher through experience, through dukkha. But the first thing what brought me to the Dhamma, the third eye, this book goes back to the 1960s. A Tibetan Lama wrote it. 20 years later, I heard that he was an English plumber in Birmingham, writing about Lhasa and the Tibetan Lamas and the religion, etc. And with the Hungarian dictionary, it took me a year to read the book. But one sentence really picked me forever. That was about dukkha, the Four Noble Truths. Because I went through hell when I was young, and a lot of suffering and problem with the family. The flood took away the house. I was married. So the Dhamma saved me, gave me a good life for nearly 60 years there. But I had to come to Australia, had to get a special permission to leave the communist country. Why, how it happened, it was very lucky and fortunate. All this just to sit here now and be grateful to you, Thay, and to Meredith, and to Prakantipalo, and Ayakema, and the Lord Buddha. That's how I feel. Thanks.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Frank. Yeah. So I think for just from a lay person point of view, many of us, we always ask the questions of why, what do I come to this life for? What's my purpose and things like that. What I envy Thay is like you knew for sure what you want to do. You know, there's no doubt, like you're pursuing that path, you know, for sure. I think many of us is still kind of like tumbling, still searching, you know, am I supposed to do this? Am I supposed to do that? So I guess I would think that is your state of presence. You've got to be really present enough to recognize what you come here to do, for you to recognize the teacher when the time is right. I think that's my point of view, and that's my constant practice of trying to be at that state, so that you know, to have that awareness. So,
my experience tells me that yes, you can be really certain about what you want, but that doesn't, when it comes to the monk's life, but that doesn't mean that getting there is going to be easy. There are all kinds of obstacles thrown up.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have to have, there's a beautiful word in Pali, aditana. You have to have strong determination to get there. And I never saw myself as a very strong person. I just saw myself as this little kid who was never very good at sport and those kind of things. And I didn't have for a long time, I had a low sense of self-esteem. But for some reason or other inside me was this sense that my life was meant for something, and that I had to protect my life because our lives are really precious. That wonderful story of the turtle that emerges out of the water once every 100 years and puts its head through the yolk. That's you know, that's the chances of becoming born a human being. Well, that always made sense to me. So yeah, it is good to have known all along, but to actually get there, I was 52 by the time I eventually got where I knew I was supposed to be. So that's quite a long time. And now I look back over my life and I wonder, did I waste time? Should I not have gone there sooner? But I think to myself, no, I didn't waste time, because everything I've done has allowed me to learn something. And I bring all of that learning with me to what I do now. And now, at the age of 71, I realize that all the things that I've done as a monk, that's all been fabulous, and I've learned a great deal. But now I know what I really want to do. After almost 23 years of being a monk, or so, what is it? No, it's not that long. 20 years of being a monk. And that's simply really to deepen my understanding of the Dharma that my teacher has taught by translating his work. And I've done so many other things as a monk, but now I know that's the one thing left to me in this lifetime, which is to understand the Dharma more. So yes, you can come early in life to understand, but it doesn't mean that you'll get there very quickly. And it doesn't mean that it'll be easy getting there. But it does encourage you to cultivate strong determination in whatever you know is true of yourself. Whether you're a lay person or a monk or nun, it's not, to me, it's not a superior or better life to be a monastic than it is to be a lay person. But once you know what your task is in this life, it's really important to work at it and to cling to it with strong determination, whether you're, whatever you are. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Makes perfect sense.
Thank you, Thay.
Thank you, Thay. Thank you, forever grateful for your teaching. Sometimes I just feel that your way of teaching is you're not really just giving your teaching, you're normally just showing, what you yourself are doing, and through that we learn, from the teaching come from there. It's like our Bhante Teja's teacher always say that word, isn't it, Sue? Saying that you cannot teach people what to do, you can only show people what you are doing. I always remember that. So we always, through your stories, through your experience, we have learned a lot from you, Thay. So thank you so much for that. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Yeah. So yeah, as I say that the teacher is offering the teaching for free. So if you would like to offer dana to Thay, so just go to our website. I just put the link down below. So just indicate that dana is for Thay, and I hope, Thay, that you have find your place to stay, or
Yes,
not yet.
No, I have.
Oh, good.
And interestingly, last week I went to visit the person who's offered me a home in Port Lincoln, which is a long, it's an 8-hour drive from Adelaide to get to Port Lincoln. And the really interesting thing is that this person is involved in Christian meditation. So we were able to sit in meditation twice a day. And it was very lovely to be able to meditate with somebody else, in spite of the fact that we were not in the same tradition, and that didn't matter. We had a deeply quiet
wonderful
time together. So yes, but we won't go until October. So there's plenty of time.
Okay.
Back up.
So you're still staying at this same place until October? All right. Yeah, that's good. And just to let everyone know, next week there won't be any teaching because many of you have known that Bhante Teja is still not well. So the operation is not all that successful, so he has to go in for another surgery, unfortunately. So we just keep Bhante in our heart, in our practice, just to wish him speedy recovery. Hope that he's free from all this pain and suffering soon.
So we'll dedicate the merit tonight to Bhante Teja Dhamma's well-being. May the wholesome energy that we have generated here tonight and at any other time in our lives be for the benefit of all living beings, and particularly for Bhante Tejadamo. May he be well, may he be happy, may he be free from suffering, may he know peace and joy and the causes of peace and joy, and may he, along with the rest of us, continue to walk the Buddha's path of truth and love together. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu,
Sadhu,
sadhu.
sadhu.
Thank you so much, Thay.
Thank